Welcome, warriors and shield maidens, to VK Tales, your Skald, ready to take you on epic journeys through the icy fjords and blood-soaked battlefields of the Viking world. Before we begin, raise your mead horns and swear loyalty to our clan. Subscribe to the channel, tell us in the comments which village you're watching from, and raise your thumbs as a sign of approval to the gods, and click the like button. Now, settle in close to the fire, because the sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink as I worked my way through the potato field. My back ached from hours of labor, but I knew I couldn't stop now. Winter was coming, and every tuber counted. "Eric! Eric, come quick!" My wife Astrid's voice carried across the field, tinged with an urgency that made my heart skip a beat. I straightened up, wiping the sweat from my brow. "What is it?" "Just come! Hurry!" Dropping my tools, I jogged towards our small house at the edge of the village. As I drew closer, I noticed Astrid wasn't alone. Our neighbors, Bjorn and Helga, stood with her, all three of them staring at the ground with expressions of confusion and fear. "What's going on?" I asked, slightly out of breath. Bjorn, a burly man with a thick red beard, pointed at the earth beneath our feet. "Feel it," he said, his voice gruff. I stood still, not understanding at first. Then I felt it, a subtle vibration as if something massive was shifting deep below the surface. The trembling grew stronger and I struggled to keep my balance. "By the gods," I whispered. "What is that?" Astrid clutched my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "It started a few minutes ago. It's getting worse." As if to punctuate her words, a low rumble echoed from the distant mountains. We all turned to look, our eyes drawn to the imposing peaks that had always loomed over our village of Dragon's Crest. "Look!" Helga cried out, pointing at the highest peak. A plume of dark smoke began to rise from the mountaintop, quickly billowing into an ominous cloud that blotted out the setting sun. The air grew thick and heavy, carrying with it an acrid stench that burned my nostrils and made my eyes water. "We need to warn the others," I said, already moving towards the village center. The others followed, our pace quickening as the tremors intensified. As we reached the village square, I saw that we weren't the only ones who had noticed the strange occurrences. A crowd had already gathered, their voices a cacophony of fear and speculation. "It's a sign from the gods." "An earthquake? Here? The mountain's not a volcano, is it?" I pushed my way through the throng, searching for one person in particular. "Where's Elder Thora?" I called out. "Here, Eric." The crowd parted to reveal a small, wizened woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. Elder Thora had been our village's leader and keeper of lore for as long as anyone could remember. "Elder Thora," I said, bowing my head slightly in respect. "What's happening? What does this mean?" The old woman's face was grave as she surveyed the panicked villagers. "I had hoped this day would never come," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What day?" Astrid asked, her hand finding mine and squeezing it tightly. Elder Thora closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When she opened them again, they were filled with a mix of fear and resignation. "The day the dragon awakens." A hush fell over the crowd, followed by nervous laughter and disbelieving mutters. "Dragon? Surely you jest, Elder," Bjorn said, though his usual bravado seemed diminished. "I wish I were, Bjorn Stonefist," Thora replied. "But the signs are unmistakable. The trembling earth, the smoke from the mountain, the foul air, all as the ancient legends foretold." I felt a chill run down my spine, remembering the stories I'd heard as a child. Tales of a great and terrible dragon that had once ruled these lands, only to be driven into a magical slumber by our ancestors. They were just stories, weren't they? "But how?" I asked. "Why now?" Elder Thora shook her head. "The legends speak of a seal, weakening over time. Perhaps it has finally broken, or perhaps—" She trailed off, her gaze distant. "Perhaps what?" Helga pressed. "Perhaps something, or someone, has awakened it," Thora finished. her words hanging ominously in the air. As if in response, a bone-chilling roar echoed from the mountains, so loud it seemed to shake the very foundations of our village. Children began to cry, and even the bravest among us felt fear grip our hearts. "What do we do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady for the sake of those around me. Elder Thora straightened herself, seeming to grow taller as she addressed the village. "We prepare. We gather our weapons, fortify our defenses, and we pray to the gods for protection." As the crowd dispersed, each person rushing to secure their homes and loved ones, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives had changed irrevocably. The sun had fully set now, leaving us in a darkness that felt oppressive and alive with danger. "Eric," Astrid said softly as we walked back to our home. "Will we be safe?" I wished I could give her the reassurance she sought, but the truth was, I had never felt less certain of anything in my life. "We'll do everything we can," I told her, pulling her close. "We're strong, our people are strong. We'll face this together." That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, listening to Astrid's steady breathing beside me, envying her ability to find rest. Every creak of our house, every gust of wind outside sent my heart racing. Was that another roar in the distance, or just my imagination? As the hours crept by, I found myself thinking of the future we had planned. The crops we would harvest and the family we hoped to start. How quickly it had all become uncertain, balanced on the edge of a... Before dawn, and I finally drifted into a fitful sleep. In my dreams, I saw a massive shape silhouetted against flames, its eyes gleaming with an ancient and terrible intelligence. I heard Elsa's voice, reciting words from a legend I had all but forgotten. "When the earth trembles and the sky turns black, the dragon of old shall rise from its rest. Fire and fury shall rain from on high, and only the brave survive the test." I awoke with a start, covered in cold sweat. The first light of dawn was creeping through our window, but instead of the usual peace it brought, I felt only dread. For I knew with a certainty that that this day would bring horrors our village had never faced. The dragon was awake, and we were not ready. The village of Dragon's Crest stirred to life as the first rays of sunlight crept over the eastern horizon. But this was no ordinary dawn. An air of trepidation hung heavy over our homes, mingling with the smell that still lingered from the previous day's ominous events. I stood at the edge of the village, my eyes fixed on the looming mountains. A crowd had gathered, their hushed whispers a chorus of fear and uncertainty. "Do you see anything, Eric?" Astrid asked, her voice trembling slightly as she gripped my arm. I shook my head, squinting against the rising sun. "Nothing yet, but that doesn't mean..." My words were cut short by a collective gasp from the crowd. A massive shadow had appeared, silhouetted against the golden sky. At first, it might have been mistaken for a cloud, but clouds don't move with such purpose, such predatory grace. "By the gods," someone whispered behind me. "It's real." The dragon's wings stretched wider than the longships in our harbor, each beat sending gusts of wind that we could feel even at this distance. Its scales glinted in the sunlight, a terrible and beautiful sight that seared itself into my memory. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. We watched, transfixed, as the creature circled high above our village. Then, with a speed that defied its massive size, it dove. "Everyone, take cover!" I shouted, grabbing Astrid and pulling her towards the nearest building. We barely made it to shelter before a gout of flame erupted from the dragon's maw, setting the thatched roof of the mead hall ablaze. The heat was intense, singeing my beard even from a distance. Chaos erupted. Villagers ran in all directions, their screams mixing with the roar of the flames and the earth-shaking bellows of the dragon. "We need to get to the shore," I told Astrid, my eyes darting around for a safe path. "The boats..." "No," she interrupted, her eyes wild with fear but her voice steady. "Our home, Eric. Our memories. Everything we've built. I wanted to argue, to tell her that none of that mattered if we didn't survive. But I understood. Our home was more than just a building. It was our life, our future. All right, I conceded. But we move fast, and at the first sign of danger, we run for the water. Agreed? She nodded, and we set off, ducking between buildings and using the chaos as cover. The dragon seemed focused on the village center, its attacks relentless and devastating. As we neared our home, a familiar voice called out, "Eirik! Astrid! Over here!" It was Bjorn, waving frantically from the doorway of the blacksmith shop. We veered towards him, diving inside just as another blast of fire lit up the street behind us. "Are you hurt?" Bjorn asked, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by grim determination. "We're fine," I panted, helping Astrid to her feet. "But our home? Forget it," Bjorn cut in. "We need every able body to fight this beast. Hakon's gathering warriors at the Great Hall." I exchanged a look with Astrid. Hakon was our village's most respected warrior, a man whose courage was matched only by his skill with a blade. "Go," Astrid said, reading my thoughts. "I'll help with the wounded and the children." I pulled her close, breathing in her scent, trying to memorize every detail of her face. "Be safe," I whispered. "You too," she replied, her voice breaking slightly. "Come back to me, Eirik." With a final nod to Bjorn, I sprinted towards the Great Hall. The scene that greeted me was one of devastation. Buildings lay in smoldering ruins, and the air was thick with smoke and the cries of the injured. Inside the hall, Hakon stood atop an overturned table, his voice rising above the din. "Our homes, our families," he was saying as I entered. "Will we cower in fear, or will we fight?" A ragged cheer went up from the assembled warriors. I pushed my way forward, catching Hakon's eye. He gave me a grim nod before continuing. "The beast is powerful, yes, but it is not invincible. Our ancestors drove it into slumber once before, and we will do so again." "But how?" a voice called out. "Our weapons are useless against its scales." Hakon held up a sword, its blade glowing with an otherworldly light. "Not all weapons," he said. "This blade was forged in the time of our forefathers, imbued with magic to pierce the dragon's hide. We have others like it, hidden away for this very day." A murmur ran through the crowd. Magic weapons? It seemed too fantastical to believe, yet after what I'd seen today, I was ready to accept any glimmer of hope. "Eirik," Hakon called, gesturing for me to join him. "You've always had a keen eye. I want you on the eastern hill coordinating our archers." I nodded, a mix of pride and terror coursing through me. "I won't let you down," I said, hoping my voice sounded more confident than I felt. As we prepared to move out, a bone-chilling roar shook the very foundations of the hall. The dragon was coming back for another attack. "Now!" Hakon shouted. "While it's focused on the village, we can catch it by surprise. For Dragon's Crest!" "For Dragon's Crest!" we echoed, our voices united in defiance of the terror that sought to destroy us. We poured out of the hall, breaking into pre-assigned groups. I raced towards the eastern hill, gathering archers as I went. From this vantage point I could see the full extent of the destruction, and the monstrous form of the dragon as it wheeled in the sky for another pass. "Knock!" I shouted, and a dozen bows creaked as arrows were drawn. "Aim!" The archers raised their bows, tracking the dragon's movement. Time seemed to slow. I could see individual scales on the beast's hide, could almost feel the heat of its breath as it opened its maw. Loose! A hail of arrows arced through the sky. Most glanced harmlessly off the dragon's scales, but a few found purchase in the softer flesh of its wings. The creature roared in pain and fury, its attack trajectory disrupted. On the ground, I saw Hakon leading a charge, the magical sword gleaming in his hand. Other warriors wielded similar weapons, their blades leaving trails of light in the air. The dragon landed with an earth-shaking impact, its talons rending great furrows in the earth. It snapped and clawed at the warriors, its every movement dealing death. But Håkon and his fighters were skilled, darting into land blows before retreating from the dragon's counterattacks. "Again!" I shouted to my archers. "Aim for the eyes, the mouth, anywhere you see flesh." Another volley flew, and this time I was rewarded with a shriek of pain as an arrow found its mark in the dragon's eye. The beast reared back, thrashing its head in agony. Håkon seized the opportunity, charging in with his glowing sword raised high. For a moment, I dared to hope that this might be the killing blow, that we might end this nightmare here and now. But the dragon was far from defeated. With a speed that belied its size, it brought its tail around in a vicious sweep. Håkon managed to leap over the attack, but others weren't so lucky. I watched in horror as warriors I had known all my life were sent flying, their bodies broken by the impact. "Fall back," I heard Håkon shout. "Regroup at the shore." The dragon, sensing its advantage, pressed forward. Fire erupted from its maw, turning the battlefield into an inferno. I watched, helpless, as brave men and women were engulfed in flames. "Eric," a voice called from behind me. I turned to see Astrid, her face smudged with soot and tears. "We have to go now." I hesitated, torn between my duty and the need to protect my wife. But as I looked back at the carnage below, I knew the battle was lost. With a heavy heart, I gave the order to retreat. As we raced towards the shore, joining the stream of fleeing villagers, I caught one last glimpse of Håkon. He stood alone before the dragon, his sword raised in defiance. Then a wall of flame obscured my view, and I could only pray to the gods for his survival. We reached the boats, helping the injured and the children aboard. As we pushed off from the shore, I looked back at the burning remnants of Dragon's Crest, the place I had called home for all my life. The dragon's roar echoed across the water, a sound of triumph and terrible promise. This wasn't the end, I realized. It was only the beginning. Astrid's hand found mine as our boat cut through the waves. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice small against the vastness of the sea. I squeezed her hand, my eyes fixed on the horizon. "We survive," I said. "We heal, and then we find a way to fight back." As Dragon's Crest disappeared behind us, consumed by smoke and flame, I made a silent vow. We would return. We would reclaim our home. And somehow, someway, we would defeat the dragon that had shattered our world. The survivors of Dragon's Crest huddled in a makeshift camp on the shores of a secluded cove, several miles down the coast from our ravaged village. The air was thick with the scent of salt and despair, punctuated by the occasional wail of mourning or cry of pain from the wounded. I sat on a weathered log, methodically running a whetstone along the edge of my sword. The repetitive motion was soothing, allowing my mind to focus on something other than the horrors we had witnessed. "Eric," a voice called, breaking my concentration. I looked up to see Håkon approaching, his left arm bound in a crude sling, his face a mask of cuts and bruises. "Håkon," I nodded, setting aside my sword. "I'm glad to see you made it." He grunted, lowering himself onto the log beside me. "Barely. That beast is unlike anything I've ever faced." "How many?" I asked, dreading the answer. Håkon's eyes clouded with grief. "Too many. We've lost nearly half the village. Those who survived." He trailed off, his gaze sweeping over the battered remnants of our people. I felt a familiar weight settling in my chest. "What do we do now?" Before Håkon could answer, Elder Thora approached, leaning heavily on a gnarled staff. "We fight," she said, her voice carrying a strength that belied her frail appearance. "With all due respect, Elder," I began, "we barely escaped with our lives. How can we possibly hope to defeat that monster?" Thora's eyes flashed with a mixture of determination and something else, a secret long held. "Follow me," she said. "Both of you." Exchanging puzzled glances, Håkon and I rose to follow the old woman. She led us away from the camp, towards a small cave, hidden behind an outcropping of rocks. "Elder Thora, what is this about?" Håkon asked as we ducked into the cave's entrance. Something I should have shared long ago, she replied cryptically. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I gasped. The cave walls were covered in intricate carvings and faded paintings. They depicted battles between men and dragons, strange symbols, and rituals I didn't recognize. By the gods, Haken breathed. What is this place? Thora ran her hand reverently over one of the carvings. This is our history, our legacy. The true story of Dragon's Crest and the beast that haunts us. Over the next hour, Elder Thora revealed a tale that shook the foundations of everything we thought we knew. Our ancestors hadn't simply driven the dragon into slumber, they had made a pact with it, a magical contract that bound the creature to protect our lands in exchange for regular offerings. But something went wrong, Thora explained. The rituals were forgotten, the offerings ceased, and now the dragon has awakened, feeling betrayed and seeking vengeance. I felt a mix of anger and confusion roiling in my gut. Why wasn't this knowledge passed down? We could have prevented all of this. Thora's shoulders sagged under the weight of centuries of secrecy. It was decided, long ago, that the knowledge was too dangerous, that it was better to let the dragon fade into legend. Hakon, who had been silently absorbing this information, finally spoke. So how does this help us now? The dragon isn't exactly in a negotiating mood. No, Thora agreed. But these caves hold more than just history. They hold the key to defeating the dragon, or binding it once more. She led us deeper into the cave, to a chamber that took my breath away. Weapons of all kinds lined the walls, each emanating a faint otherworldly glow. The weapons of our ancestors, Thora said, forged with magic and imbued with the power to harm the dragon. Hakon's eyes lit up with a fierce joy as he ran his hand over a massive warhammer. Now this I can work with. As we began to examine the weapons, a commotion from outside caught our attention. We rushed back to the camp to find Astrid waiting for us, her face pale with worry. Eric, she said, grasping my arm. There's something you need to see. She led us to the edge of the camp, where a group had gathered around a young scout. The boy, no more than 15, was gasping for breath, his eyes wide with terror. Report, Hakon commanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. The scout swallowed hard before speaking. The dragon, sir. It's on the move, heading this way. A ripple of fear passed through the assembled villagers. I felt my own heart racing, the memory of fire and death all too fresh in my mind. Hakon turned to me, his jaw set with grim determination. Eric, gather every able-bodied warrior. We make our stand here. As I moved to comply, Astrid caught my arm. Eric, wait. You can't be serious about fighting that thing again. I cupped her face in my hands, wishing I could promise her safety, wishing I could run away with her and leave this nightmare behind. But I knew I couldn't. We have to, my love. If we don't stop it here, it will hunt us to the ends of the earth. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded, understanding. Then let me fight with you. No, I said firmly. I need you to help Elder Thora organize the evacuation of the wounded and the children. If we fail. I couldn't finish the thought, but Astrid understood. She pulled me into a fierce embrace. Don't you dare fail, Eric. Come back to me. With a final kiss, I turned to the task at hand. The next hours were a blur of activity as we prepared for battle. Warriors were armed with the magical weapons from the cave, strategies were hastily formed, and defenses were erected as best we could with our limited resources. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across our makeshift fortress, I found myself standing beside Hakon on a rocky outcropping, watching the horizon for any sign of the dragon. Do you think we have a chance? I asked, voicing the fear that gnawed at my gut. Hakon was silent for a long moment before responding. I think we have to try. For our families, for our home, for everything we've lost and everything we stand to lose. I nodded, tightening my grip on my sword. A beautiful light blade that hummed with barely contained energy. Eric, Hakon said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. If I fall, promise me you'll lead our people. Get them somewhere safe, somewhere they can start anew. You're not going to fall, I replied, more forcefully than I intended. We're going to win this together. A hint of a smile crossed Hakon's battered face. Together, then, for Dragon's Crest. For Dragon's Crest, I echoed. As if summoned by our words, a distant roar shattered the evening calm. On the horizon, a dark shape appeared, growing larger with each passing moment. It's time, Hakon said, raising his voice to be heard by all. Remember your training. Remember what we fight for. Today, we take back our future. A ragged cheer went up from our assembled forces. I cast one last look back at the camp, catching a glimpse of Astrid helping the last of the non-combatants into the relative safety of the caves. Our eyes met across the distance, and in that moment, I made a silent vow to return to her. Turning back to face the approaching doom, I raised my sword, its magical glow seeming to push back the encroaching darkness. The dragon's roar shook the very ground beneath our feet, but we stood firm. This was it. Our last stand. Our chance for redemption, for survival, for hope. As the massive shape of the dragon blotted out the stars, I steeled myself for the battle to come. Win or lose, the fate of Dragon's Crest would be decided this night. The acrid stench of sulfur and decay assaulted my nostrils as we entered the dragon's cave. The narrow passage twisted deeper into the mountain, the walls slick with moisture and something that looked unsettlingly like dried blood. Our torches cast flickering shadows that danced across the rough stone, creating phantoms that made my heart race with each step. Keep close, Hakon whispered from the front of our small group. And stay alert. We don't know what traps might lie ahead. I nodded, though he couldn't see me in the dim light. Behind me I heard the nervous breathing of the 4 other warriors who had volunteered for this perilous mission. We were the vanguard, tasked with scouting the dragon's lair while the rest of our forces prepared for the final battle outside. As we crept forward, the passage gradually widened, opening into a vast cavern. The ceiling arched high above us, lost in darkness. Stalagmites rose from the floor like the teeth of some gargantuan beast, and in the distance, I could hear the steady drip of water. By the gods, Bjorn breathed beside me. It's like a whole world down here. A world we don't belong in, Helga added, her voice tight with tension. Hakon raised a hand, signaling us to stop. Look there, he said, pointing to a narrow side passage. That might lead us deeper into the lair. As we approached the passage, something caught my eye. Wait, I said, crouching down to examine the ground. These markings, they're not natural. The floor was covered in intricate symbols, carved with precision into the stone. They formed a complex pattern that seemed to pulse faintly in the torchlight. Elder Thora mentioned something like this, Hakon mused. Said they might be part of the old magic that once bound the dragon. Can we use them? I asked, hope flaring in my chest. Hakon shook his head. Not without knowing more. For now we press on, but keep an eye out for more of these symbols. They might prove useful later. We continued our descent, the air growing thicker and harder to breathe with each step. The passage twisted and turned, leading us ever deeper into the mountain's heart. Just as I was beginning to wonder if we'd ever find our way out again, we emerged into another chamber, and I froze in awe. Before us stretched a vast hall, its walls glittering with veins of gold and precious gems. Piles of treasure lay scattered about, coins, jewelry, ancient artifacts, and weapons of exquisite craftsmanship. The wealth of ages lay before us, more than I had ever imagined could exist in one place. Incredible, Bjorn whispered, his eyes wide with wonder and greed. I felt it too, a pull towards the glittering hoard. My fingers itched to touch the gold, to feel its weight and coolness against my skin. For a moment I forgot about our mission, about the danger we were in. Focus, Hakon's sharp voice cut through the spell. Remember why we're here. This treasure is cursed with dragon magic. Touch nothing. His words brought me back to reality, but I could see the struggle on the faces of my companions. Helga, in particular, seemed transfixed by a delicate silver tiara adorned with sapphires. "Helga," I said gently, touching her arm. "We need to keep moving." She blinked, shaking her head as if to clear it. "Right, yes, of course." We skirted the edge of the treasure room, careful not to disturb anything. As we neared the far side, I noticed something odd about one of the walls. "Håkon," I called softly. "Look at this." The wall was covered in intricate murals, depicting scenes of battle and what appeared to be rituals. But it was the central image that caught my attention. A massive dragon surrounded by human figures who seemed to be worshipping it. "What does it mean?" I asked, tracing the lines of the mural with my eyes. Håkon studied the image intently. "I'm not sure, but it looks like there was some kind of pact between our ancestors and the dragon. Not just a binding, but a partnership." "That can't be right," Bjorn protested. "Why would our people ever align themselves with such a monster?" Before Håkon could respond, a deafening roar echoed through the cavern, shaking loose stones from the ceiling. We all froze, our hearts pounding in unison. "It knows we're here," Helga whispered, her face pale with fear. Håkon's expression hardened. "Then there's no point in stealth anymore. We need to find its weak spot, and fast." We hurried through another passage, the roars growing louder with each step. The air grew hotter, and I could smell smoke. We were close. Suddenly, the passage opened up into an enormous cavern, easily the size of our entire village. And there, in the center, coiled around a massive pillar of stone, was the dragon. Its scales gleamed like polished obsidian in the dim light, and its eyes, gods, its eyes were alive with an intelligence that shook me to my core. This was no mere beast. This was an ancient, cunning entity that had seen the rise and fall of empires. For a moment, we all stood frozen, awe and terror rooting us to the spot. Then the dragon's massive head swung towards us, and those terrible eyes fixed on our small group. "Humans," it spoke, its voice a rumble that I felt in my bones. "You dare to enter my domain?" I exchanged shocked glances with my companions. It could speak? Håkon, ever the leader, stepped forward. "We come seeking answers," he said, his voice steady despite the fear I knew he must be feeling. "And an end to the destruction you've brought upon our people." The dragon's laugh was like an avalanche. "Answers? You know nothing of the questions you should be asking, little ones. As for destruction," its eyes narrowed, "I merely claimed what was promised to me ages ago." "What do you mean?" I found myself asking, drawn into the conversation despite my terror. "What promise?" The dragon's gaze shifted to me, and I felt the weight of millennia pressing down on me. "Your ancestors swore a blood oath, protection and power in exchange for tribute and worship. But you forgot. You broke faith. And now, the price must be paid." Håkon's hand tightened on his weapon. "We knew nothing of this oath. Surely you can see that punishing us for the mistakes of our forebears is unjust?" "Justice?" The dragon reared up, its full size becoming apparent. It was enormous, dwarfing us like ants before a giant. "You speak to me of justice when your kind has hunted my kin to near extinction? When you've stolen our lands, desecrated our sacred places?" I could feel the heat of its anger, see the flames building in its throat. We had come seeking information, but it was clear that diplomacy was no longer an option. "Now!" Håkon shouted, and we scattered just as a jet of flame erupted from the dragon's maw. The battle was joined. We darted between stalagmites, using the terrain to our advantage as we struck at the dragon with our enchanted weapons. But for every blow we landed, the beast's scales turned aside a dozen more. As I rolled away from a swipe of its massive claws, I caught sight of something strange. There, on the dragon's chest, was a patch of scales that seemed different, darker, almost scarred. "Håkon!" I shouted over the din of battle. "Its chest! There's a weak spot!" He nodded, understanding immediately. "Distract it," he called to the others. "Eric and I will make for the killing blow." What followed was a desperate dance of steel and flame. Bjorn, Helga, and the others darted in and out, keeping the dragon's attention divided while Hakon and I worked our way closer to its vulnerable area. Just as we were about to strike, the dragon's tail whipped around, catching Hakon in the side and sending him flying. I heard the sickening crunch of breaking bones as he hit the cavern wall. "Hakon!" I cried out, but there was no response. He lay still, broken, his magical sword skittering across the ground. Rage and grief welled up inside me. With a roar of my own, I charged forward, scooping up Hakon's fallen weapon. Dual-wielding the enchanted blades, I leapt towards the dragon's chest. Time seemed to slow. I saw the surprise in the dragon's ancient eyes, felt the heat of its breath on my face. Then my blades struck home, sinking deep into that scarred patch of scales. The dragon's scream of pain and fury shook the very mountain. As I fell back, I saw dark blood welling from the wound I'd inflicted. It wasn't a killing blow, but it was significant. "Retreat," I shouted to the others. "Fall back now." As we fled the cavern, carrying Hakon's limp form between us, I could hear the dragon's roars echoing behind us. We had wounded it, yes, but we had also enraged it beyond measure. The real battle, I realized with a sinking heart, was yet to come, and now it would be without Hakon's leadership. As we emerged from the cave into the fading daylight, I saw the anxious faces of our people. They looked to me, waiting for news, for direction. With a heavy heart, I raised my voice to address them. "We have struck a blow against the beast," I said, trying to infuse my words with a confidence I didn't feel. "But the fight is far from over. Prepare yourselves. Tonight, we make our final stand." As the crowd dispersed to make ready, I caught sight of Astrid pushing her way towards me. The look of relief on her face as she saw me alive quickly turned to concern as she noticed Hakon's condition. "Eric," she said, taking my blood-stained hand in hers. "What happened in there?" I looked into her eyes, seeing the fear and love there in equal measure. How could I tell her about the ancient pact, the dragon's words, the terrible battle we had barely survived? "We learned much," I said finally. "But the cost..." I glanced at Hakon's still form as our healers tended to him. "The cost may be too high." Astrid squeezed my hand. "Whatever comes, we face it together." I nodded, drawing strength from her presence. As the sun sank towards the horizon, I knew that the coming night would determine the fate of our people. Win or lose, nothing would ever be the same again. The night air crackled with tension as we took our positions along the rocky shoreline. The moon hung low and full, casting an eerie glow across the restless waves. I stood at the forefront of our makeshift army, my enchanted sword gleaming with an otherworldly light. "Eric," Astrid's voice came from behind me, thick with worry. "Are you sure about this?" I turned to face her, taking in the sight of my wife clad in leather armor, a bow slung across her back. Despite my protests, she had insisted on fighting alongside us. "No," I admitted, my voice low. "But we're out of options. If we don't make our stand here, that beast will hunt us to the ends of the earth." She nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Then we face it together." A commotion from the rear caught our attention. Bjorn came rushing forward, his face pale in the moonlight. "Eric!" he called. "It's Hakon. He's awake." My heart leapt. Could it be? I had feared our leader lost after the battle in the dragon's lair. "Take me to him," I ordered, following Bjorn to the makeshift infirmary we'd set up in a nearby cave. Inside, I found Hakon propped up on a bed of furs, his body wrapped in bandages but his eyes clear and alert. "Eric," he said, his voice weak but steady. "Report." I knelt beside him, relief washing over me. "We're prepared as we'll ever be. The dragon hasn't shown itself yet, but we know it's coming." Hakon nodded, wincing slightly at the movement. "The wound you dealt it?" It will make the beast cautious, but also more dangerous. It knows we can hurt it now. What should we do? I asked, suddenly feeling the weight of leadership lift slightly from my shoulders. Haakon's eyes met mine, filled with a mix of pain and fierce determination. You must lead them, Eric. I'm in no condition to fight, but our people need a leader they can rally behind. I felt a protest rising in my throat, but Haakon cut me off with a raised hand. You've always had it in you, he said. Now is the time to prove it. Remember what we learned in the dragon's lair. Use that knowledge. Before I could respond, a bone-chilling roar split the night air. The dragon had arrived. Go, Haakon urged. Lead our people to victory. With a final nod to my mentor, I rushed out of the cave. The sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. The dragon circled overhead, its massive form blotting out the stars. Flames erupted from its maw, setting the treetops ablaze. Archers, I bellowed, my voice carrying over the panic. Knock your arrows. Aim for the wings. A hail of arrows arced through the sky, most glancing harmlessly off the dragon's scales. But a few found purchase in the leathery membrane of its wings, eliciting a roar of pain and fury. The beast dove, and I felt the heat of its breath as I rolled behind a boulder. Now, I shouted. Spears and pikes. Our front line bristled with steel as the dragon swooped low. I heard screams of agony as its talons raked through our ranks, but also a bellow of pain as our weapons struck home. I leapt from my cover, my enchanted sword humming with power. With me, I cried, charging towards the dragon's flank. Astrid appeared at my side, loosing arrow after arrow with deadly accuracy. The battle became a blur of fire, steel, and blood. I dodged a jet of flame, feeling the heat sear my skin as I rolled behind a boulder. The acrid smell of burning flesh filled the air, punctuated by screams of pain and defiance. Eric, Bjorn's voice cut through the chaos. It's belly. The scales are weaker there. I nodded, formulating a plan. Astrid, I called. Can you hit its eyes? We need to ground it. My wife's face was a mask of concentration as she nocked an arrow. I'll try, she said, drawing back the bowstring. Time seemed to slow as Astrid released her arrow. It flew true, striking the dragon's left eye. The beast reared back, roaring in agony, its wings beating furiously as it tried to gain altitude. Now's our chance, I shouted. Bring it down. Our remaining forces rallied, hurling spears and firing arrows at the dragon's wounded wings. Slowly, inexorably, the creature began to descend, unable to stay aloft. As it crashed to the ground, the earth shook beneath our feet. I charged forward, my enchanted sword raised high. For Dragon's Crest, I cried, my voice joined by dozens of others. The dragon's tail lashed out, sending warriors flying, its remaining eye fixed on me, filled with an intelligence and rage that chilled me to the bone. Foolish humans, it growled, its voice resonating in my chest. You know not what you do. I faltered for a moment, remembering the murals in its lair, the talk of ancient pacts. Then tell us, I shouted, dodging another swipe of its claws. What is it we don't understand? The dragon's laugh was like an avalanche. You are but children, playing with forces beyond your comprehension. The balance must be maintained, the old ways respected. What old ways? I pressed, keeping my guard up as I circled the beast. The pact our ancestors made? A pact sealed in blood and magic, the dragon rumbled. Protection for worship, power for sacrifice. You have forgotten, and so you must be reminded. Its words gave me pause, and in that moment of hesitation, the dragon struck. Its tail caught me in the chest, sending me flying. I hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from my lungs. Through blurred vision, I saw the dragon rear up, flames building in its throat. This was it, I thought. The end. But then a figure darted in front of me. Astrid, her bow raised, determination etched on her face. No, I tried to shout, but no sound came out. Astrid loosed her arrow just as the dragon unleashed its inferno. The arrow struck true, burying itself in the dragon's throat. but the flames engulfed my wife, her scream of agony cutting off abruptly. "Astrid!" I roared, finding my voice and my feet in one surge of grief and rage. The dragon thrashed, choking on the arrow lodged in its gullet. Black blood oozed from the wound, sizzling where it hit the ground. With a cry of anguish and fury, I charged forward, my enchanted sword leaving trails of light in the air. The dragon's eye widened in surprise as I leapt, bringing my blade down with all my strength. The sword sank deep into the dragon's skull, right between its eyes. For a moment everything went still. Then the beast let out a final earth-shaking roar before collapsing to the ground. Silence fell over the battlefield. I stood there panting, my sword still buried in the dragon's head. Slowly, I became aware of the cheers rising from our surviving warriors. But I felt no joy, no triumph. My eyes sought out the charred form of my wife, lying motionless on the scorched earth. As I stumbled towards her, my legs giving out beneath me, I heard the dragon's voice one last time, a whisper in my mind. "The balance is broken. The price will be paid. In fire and blood, the cycle begins anew." Then darkness took me, and I knew no more. When I came to, I found myself back in the infirmary cave. Hakon sat beside me, his face grim. "How long?" I croaked, my throat raw. 2 days, he replied. "The dragon is dead, Eirik. You did it." I closed my eyes, feeling no sense of victory. "Astrid?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Hakon's silence was confirmation enough. I felt tears burning behind my eyelids, but I forced them back. There would be time for grief later. "What now?" I asked, forcing myself to sit up, despite the pain that lanced through my body. Hakon's expression was troubled. "The dragon's words, they've been weighing on me. I fear we've won the battle but started something much worse." I nodded, remembering the beast's final warning. "The balance is broken," I murmured. "We need answers," Hakon said, "about the pact, about what our ancestors did, and we need to prepare." "Prepare for what?" I asked, though deep down I knew. Hakon's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "For whatever comes next. I fear the dragon was just the beginning." As I looked out at the remnants of our people, battered but alive, I felt the weight of leadership settling firmly on my shoulders. We had survived, but at a terrible cost. And something told me that our trials were far from over. "Then we'll face it together," I said, echoing Astrid's words from what felt like a lifetime ago. "For Dragon's Crest, for those we've lost, and for whatever future we can salvage from this chaos." Hakon nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Together," he agreed. As the sun set on our battered but unbroken community, I knew that our greatest challenges still lay ahead. But we would face them as one, honoring the sacrifices of those we'd lost, and fighting for a future worth believing in. The dragon was dead, but our story was far from over. The cave was dim, lit only by flickering torchlight that cast long shadows on the rough walls. I sat by Hakon's bedside, carefully unwrapping the bandages that covered his wounds. The angry red gashes were healing but slowly. As I worked, my eyes were drawn to the hilt of Hakon's sword, propped against the wall nearby. "Hakon," I said, my voice low, "I've been meaning to ask you about your sword. Those markings on the hilt, I've never seen anything like them before." Hakon's eyes, which had been closed in pain, fluttered open. He followed my gaze to the weapon. "Ah," he said, a hint of a smile crossing his face. "You've noticed." I finished rebinding his wounds and sat back, waiting. Hakon reached out, wincing slightly, and grasped the sword's hilt. As he did, the strange symbols seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly light. "This sword has been passed down through my family for generations," Hakon explained. "The markings, they say, are from the time of the first pact with the dragon." I leaned in closer, fascinated. "Can you read them?" Hakon shook his head. Not entirely, but I know they speak of balance, of power given and received, of a bond between our people and the great beasts of old. Before I could ask more, a commotion outside the cave caught our attention. Moments later, Elder Thora burst in, her face flushed with excitement. "Eric! Hakon!" she exclaimed. "You must come quickly. We've found something." Helping Hakon to his feet, we followed the elder through the winding passages of our temporary refuge. She led us to a small chamber I hadn't noticed before, hidden behind an outcropping of rock. "By the gods," I whispered as we entered. The chamber was filled with scrolls, artifacts, and strange devices I couldn't begin to comprehend. At the center stood a large stone table, covered in more of the mysterious symbols I'd seen on Hakon's sword. "What is all this?" Hakon asked, his voice filled with wonder. Elder Thora ran her hand reverently over the stone table. "Our history," she said solemnly. "The true history of Dragon's Crest hidden away for generations." For the next several hours we pored over the ancient texts and artifacts. Much of it was indecipherable, written in languages long forgotten. But slowly, painfully, a picture began to emerge. "Listen to this," I said, reading from a particularly old scroll. "In the time of great turmoil, when the skies rained fire and the earth shook with the fury of giants, our ancestors sought protection. They turned to the great dragons, beings of immense power and wisdom." Hakon nodded, his face grave. "It fits with what the dragon told us. A pact of protection." "But there's more," Elder Thora interjected. She held up a small ornate box. Inside was a tooth, easily as long as my forearm, a dragon's tooth. The pact was sealed with blood, dragon's blood and human blood, mixed and bound by ancient magic. I felt a chill run down my spine. What exactly did our ancestors agree to? Elder Thora's eyes were sad as she continued. "In exchange for the dragon's protection, our people would provide regular sacrifices, not just of animals or wealth, but of our own." "Human sacrifices?" I gasped, horror filling me. Hakon's face had gone pale. And we stopped. Somewhere along the line we forgot or chose to forget. We broke the pact. "And now the dragon has exacted its revenge," I said, the weight of realization settling heavily on my shoulders. We lapsed into silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The implications of what we'd learned were staggering. Our entire history, everything we thought we knew about our people and our home, had been built on a foundation of secrets and forgotten promises. As the night wore on, we continued to uncover more shocking revelations. Maps showing the locations of other dragon lairs, rituals for communing with the great beasts, even instructions for forging weapons capable of harming them. It was nearing dawn when Bjorn burst into the chamber, his face ashen. "Eirik," he panted, "it's Leif. He's dead." I felt my heart sink. Leif had been one of our bravest warriors, grievously wounded in the battle with the dragon but showing signs of recovery. "How?" I demanded. Bjorn shook his head, confusion and fear evident in his eyes. "The healers don't know, he just withered away. And Eirik, there's something else. His body, it's covered in markings, like the ones on Hakon's sword." Exchanging alarmed glances with Hakon and Elder Thora, I rushed to follow Bjorn. In the infirmary, a small crowd had gathered around Leif's body. As I approached, the crowd parted and I had to stifle a gasp. Leif's skin was indeed covered in glowing symbols, pulsing with a faint, sickly light. His once robust frame had been reduced to little more than skin and bones, as if something had drained the very life from him. "What does it mean?" someone in the crowd whispered. I turned to Elder Thora, hoping for answers, but the old woman's face was a mask of shock and dismay. I don't know," she admitted. "Nothing in the ancient texts spoke of anything like this." A murmur of fear rippled through the gathered villagers. I could see panic beginning to set in and knew I had to act quickly. "Listen to me," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the growing commotion. "I know you're frightened. We all are. but we've faced worse and survived. We will unravel this mystery, and we will find a way forward, together. My words seemed to calm the crowd somewhat, but I could still see the doubt and fear in their eyes. As the villagers dispersed, I pulled Håkon and Elder Thora aside. "We need answers," I said, my voice low and urgent. "And we need them fast, before panic sets in completely." Håkon nodded, his face grim. "I agree. But where do we start? We've already gone through most of the ancient texts." Elder Thora's eyes suddenly lit up. "Not all of them," she said. "There's one place we haven't looked yet, the dragon's lair." I felt a chill run down my spine at the thought of returning to that terrible place, but I knew she was right. If answers existed anywhere, it would be there. "All right," I said, steeling myself. "We'll go at nightfall. A small group, just the three of us, and maybe Bjorn. We can't risk spreading panic by letting everyone know where we're going." As we made our preparations throughout the day, I couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. The dragon might be dead, but its shadow still loomed large over our people, and something told me that our troubles were far from over. As the sun began to set, I found myself standing at the edge of our encampment, looking out towards the mountains where the dragon's lair awaited. Astrid's absence felt like a physical ache, and I found myself wishing desperately for her steady presence and wise counsel. "I'll find the answers, my love," I whispered to the wind. "For you, for our people, for the future we dreamed of. I swear it." With a heavy heart but a determined spirit, I turned back to join Håkon, Elder Thora, and Bjorn. As we set out into the gathering darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into the maw of something far greater and more terrible than we could imagine. But we had no choice. The fate of Dragon's Crest, and perhaps much more, hung in the balance. Whatever secrets awaited us in the dragon's lair, whatever price we might have to pay, we would face it. For our people, for our future, for the truth, no matter how dark it might be. As we disappeared into the night, the glowing symbols on Leif's body pulsed once more, as if in warning or anticipation. The next chapter of our saga was about to unfold, and I feared it would be the most challenging yet. But we would face it together, as we had faced everything else. And somehow, some way, we would find a way to break this curse and forge a new future for Dragon's Crest. Little did we know, the true test of our resolve was yet to come. The watchtower creaked ominously in the pre-dawn wind as I climbed the rickety ladder to the top. My muscles ached from days of constant vigilance, but I forced myself to focus. As I reached the platform, I nodded to Ingrid, the young shield maiden who had taken the night watch. "Anything?" I asked, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Ingrid shook her head, her eyes bloodshot from strain. "All quiet, Eirik, but there's something in the air. Can you feel it?" I knew exactly what she meant. Since our return from the dragon's lair 3 days ago, a palpable sense of dread had settled over our makeshift village. The knowledge we'd gained weighed heavily on my shoulders, secrets I wasn't sure how to share with our people. As the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, I saw it. A dark shape moving across the sky, too large to be a bird, too fast to be a cloud. "Gods preserve us," I whispered, my heart sinking. "Sound the alarm, Ingrid. It's back." The young warrior's face paled, but she nodded resolutely and grabbed the horn at her belt. As its mournful cry echoed across the village, I watched in horror as the shape in the sky grew larger, its features becoming terrifyingly clear. It wasn't the same dragon we had fought before. This one was smaller, sleeker, but no less deadly. As it swooped low over our fields, gouts of flame erupted from its maw, setting our precious crops ablaze. "Eirik," Håkon's voice carried up from below. Despite his injuries, he had insisted on joining the defense. "What do you see?" I scrambled down the ladder, my mind racing. "It's another dragon," I reported grimly. "Smaller than the last, but just as dangerous. It's destroying our crops." Hakon's face hardened. Gather the archers, we need to drive it off before it turns on the village itself. As our defenders rushed to their positions, I caught sight of Elder Thora emerging from her tent, her face a mask of dismay. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The reckoning has begun." I wanted to ask her what she meant, but there was no time. The dragon was making another pass, its roar shaking the very ground beneath our feet. "Archers!" I bellowed. "Knock! Draw! Loose!" A volley of arrows arced through the sky, most glancing harmlessly off the dragon's scales. But a few found purchase in the softer membrane of its wings, eliciting a screech of pain and fury. The beast wheeled in the air, its eyes fixing on our position with terrifying intelligence. As it dove towards us, I made a split-second decision. "Everyone, fall back to the caves," I shouted. "We can't face it in the open." As our people fled, I saw families struggling with children and elders. Without thinking, I rushed to help, scooping up a young boy who had fallen in the chaos. "Eric, look out!" Hakon's warning came just in time. I dove to the side, feeling the heat of dragon fire scorching the earth where I had stood moments before. The child in my arms wailed in terror, and I held him close as we raced for the relative safety of the mountain caves. Once inside, I handed the boy to his grateful mother and turned to assess our situation. The dragon's massive head appeared at the cave entrance, its nostrils flaring as it tried to reach us. "We can't stay here forever," Bjorn growled, his axe at the ready. "We'll be trapped." He was right, but I needed time to think. As I racked my brain for a solution, my eyes fell on the satchel at Elder Thora's side, the one containing the artifacts and scrolls we'd recovered from the dragon's lair. "Elder," I said urgently, "in those texts, was there anything about repelling dragons? Any kind of ward or spell?" Thora's eyes widened in realization. She quickly rifled through the ancient papers, her fingers trembling with urgency. "Here," she exclaimed, pulling out a weathered parchment. "A ritual of warding, but... Eric, it requires a sacrifice." The cave fell silent save for the dragon's frustrated roars outside. I could feel every eye on me, waiting for a decision. "What kind of sacrifice?" I asked, dreading the answer. Thora's voice was heavy with sorrow. "Blood. The blood of one who has slain a dragon." My heart sank. I knew what had to be done. "Then take mine," I said, rolling up my sleeve. "I dealt the killing blow to the last dragon. If my blood can save our people, so be it." "Eric, no," Hakon protested. "We can't lose you. There must be another way." But I could see in his eyes that he knew as well as I did that we had no other choice. "Prepare the ritual," I ordered Thora. "Quickly, before that beast finds a way in here." As Thora began drawing symbols on the cave floor with trembling hands, I turned to address our huddled, frightened people. "Listen to me," I said, my voice carrying through the cave. "I know you're scared. I am too. But we've faced worse than this and survived. We are the people of Dragon's Crest, and we will not fall here today." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, fear giving way to determination. I saw hands clasping weapons, backs straightening with resolve. "The ritual is ready," Thora announced. I nodded, kneeling beside her. As she began to chant in an ancient tongue, I held out my arm. The blade she used to open my vein was cold, the pain sharp but distant. I watched my blood drip onto the symbols she had drawn, each drop seeming to ignite with an inner fire. As Thora's chanting reached a crescendo, a wave of energy pulsed outward from the ritual circle. I felt it pass through me, a sensation of both ice and fire that left me gasping. Outside, the dragon's roars turned from rage to pain. We rushed to the cave entrance to see the beast thrashing in the air, as if fighting against an invisible force. "It's working!" someone cried out in jubilation, but our relief was short-lived. As the dragon retreated, I saw the true extent of the damage it had wrought. Our fields were a charred ruin, our homes little more than smoking husks. "What now?" Bjorn asked, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. I looked out at the devastation. then back at our battered but unbroken people. Now, I said, my resolve hardening, we rebuild, and we prepare, because this is just the beginning. As we emerged from the caves to survey the damage and begin the monumental task of reconstruction, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were entering a new and terrifying chapter in our history. The dragons were returning, and with them, the ancient pacts and terrible secrets of our past. That night, as our people huddled around meager fires, I sat with Hakon and Elder Thora, planning our next move. "We need to evacuate," Hakon said, his face grim in the firelight. "Find somewhere safer, at least until we can better defend ourselves." I nodded reluctantly. Agreed, but where, and how do we move so many people safely? Elder Thora spoke up, her voice low and urgent. "There is a place, an ancient stronghold, built in the time when our people and the dragons lived in harmony. It's mentioned in the texts we found." "Where is it?" I asked, hope flaring in my chest. "High in the mountains," Thora replied. "A perilous journey, but if we can reach it, then we have a chance," I finished. As the embers of our fire died down, I made my decision. Come morning, we would begin preparations for the most dangerous journey of our lives. But as I looked around at our resilient, determined people, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had survived the dragon's attack. We had uncovered ancient secrets and performed rituals of power. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. For we were the people of Dragon's Crest, and our story was far from over. The moon hung low and full over our makeshift camp, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. We had been traveling for days, the arduous journey into the mountains taking its toll on our already weary people. As I made my nightly rounds, checking on sentries and comforting those who couldn't sleep, a flicker of movement caught my eye. A hooded figure was slipping away from the camp, moving with a furtiveness that immediately set my nerves on edge. Without a sound, I followed, my hand resting on the hilt of my sword. The figure led me through a winding path between boulders and stunted trees, always just out of clear sight. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of anticipation and dread building with each step. Finally, the path opened into a small clearing, bathed in moonlight. I crouched behind a large rock, scarcely daring to breathe as I watched the scene unfold before me. The hooded figure stood in the center of the clearing, head bowed as if in prayer or concentration. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a gust of wind whipped through the clearing, and with it came a sound that chilled me to my very core. The beating of massive wings. A dragon, smaller than the one we had faced in battle but no less terrifying, descended from the night sky. Its scales gleamed like polished onyx in the moonlight, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly intelligence. To my utter astonishment, the hooded figure did not flee or cower. Instead, it straightened, pushing back its hood to reveal a face I knew all too well. "Sigrid," I whispered, disbelief and betrayal warring in my heart. Sigrid had been one of our most trusted advisors, a woman known for her wisdom and dedication to our people. To see her standing before a dragon, calm and unafraid, shook me to my core. "You're late," Sigrid said, her voice carrying clearly in the still night air. The dragon's laugh was like grinding stones. "Time means little to my kind human. I came as agreed. Now, what news do you bring?" I listened in growing horror as Sigrid began to speak, revealing our plans, our weaknesses, even the location of the ancient stronghold we sought. "They grow stronger," Sigrid was saying. "The ritual Eric performed to drive off your kin. It awakened something in him, in all of them. The old magic stirs." The dragon's eyes narrowed. "This is troubling news. Perhaps we have underestimated these humans." Sigrid nodded. "Which is why I've come with a proposal. Help me eliminate their leaders, Eric, Hakon, the Elder Thora, and I will ensure our people return to the old ways. The pact will be renewed, the balance restored." My blood ran cold. Sigrid, whom we had trusted, was plotting our deaths. But why? As if in answer to my unspoken question, Sigrid continued. In return, I ask for two things. Power, the power to lead and protect our people as you once did. And she hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. Immortality. The dragon regarded her silently for a long moment. Then it spoke, its voice rumbling like distant thunder. Ambitious for a human, but not unreasonable. Very well, I accept your terms. When do you propose we strike? Tomorrow night, Sigrid replied. They'll be exhausted from the day's travel, their guard down. I'll ensure Eric and Håkon are separated from the main group. You can deal with them while I... A twig snapped beneath my foot, cutting off Sigrid's words. Both she and the dragon whirled towards my hiding place, eyes searching the darkness. We are not alone, the dragon growled. I knew I had only moments before I was discovered. My mind raced, weighing my options. I could confront them now, but against a dragon and a traitor with unknown powers, my chances were slim. No, I needed to warn the others. As quietly as I could, I began to retreat, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. There! Sigrid shouted, pointing directly at me. I abandoned stealth for speed, sprinting back towards the camp. Behind me, I heard the dragon's roar and the sound of massive wings beating the air. Intruder! I bellowed as I burst into the camp. To arms, dragon attack. Chaos erupted as people scrambled for weapons, children crying out in fear. I raced towards where I knew Håkon and Elder Thora would be, my lungs burning with exertion. Eric! Håkon called, already buckling on his armor. What's happening? Betrayal, I gasped, quickly recounting what I had witnessed. Håkon's face darkened with fury, while Elder Thora's eyes filled with a deep sadness. I had feared this day might come, she said softly. The lure of the old magic. It can corrupt even the purest heart. Before we could discuss further, a familiar roar split the night air. The dragon had found us. Håkon, organize our defenses, I ordered. Elder Thora, get the non-combatants to safety. I'll try to buy us some time. As I turned to leave, Håkon grabbed my arm. Eric, be careful. Remember what we learned in the dragon's lair. These creatures are more than just beasts. I nodded grimly, then raced towards the sounds of battle. The scene that greeted me was one of chaos and terror. The dragon wheeled overhead, breathing gouts of flame that set our makeshift shelters ablaze. Our archers loosed volley after volley, but most arrows simply glanced off the creature's scales. And there, in the midst of it all, stood Sigrid. Her hands glowed with an eerie light, and as I watched, she gestured towards a group of our warriors. To my horror, they turned on their comrades, eyes blank and movements puppet-like. Sigrid! I shouted, raising my sword. Stop this madness! She turned to me, and I barely recognized the woman I had known. Her eyes burned with an inhuman light, her face twisted in a rictus of triumph and disdain. Madness! She laughed. No, Eric. This is salvation. Our people were meant for greatness, meant to rule alongside the dragons. You would have us hide and cower, but I will restore us to our true place. With a gesture, she sent her enthralled warriors charging towards me. I fought defensively, trying to incapacitate rather than kill my bewitched comrades. But for everyone I knocked down, 2 more seemed to take their place. You can't win, Eric, Sigrid called, her voice dripping with mock pity. Surrender now. Pledge yourself to the old ways and I'll ensure you have a place in the new order. Never, I spat, parrying a blow and countering with a pommel strike that sent another warrior crumpling to the ground. Sigrid's face hardened. Then you'll die with the rest of the old guard. She raised her hands, energy crackling between her fingers. I braced myself for an attack, but before she could strike, a familiar voice rang out. Sigrid! We both turned to see Elder Thora standing atop a large boulder, her staff raised high. The old woman's eyes blazed with a power I had never seen before, and when she spoke, her voice seemed to resonate with the very mountains around us. You dare pervert the old magics? Thora thundered. You, who swore to protect and guide our people? For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across Sigrid's face. You don't understand, she said, her voice wavering. This is the only way to ensure our survival. The dragons will destroy us all if we don't submit. And what of our freedom? I countered, taking a step towards her. What of the future we fought so hard for? You would hand all that over for personal power? Sigrid's resolve seemed to waver, doubt creeping into her eyes. But then the dragon landed behind her with an earth-shaking impact, and her face hardened once more. Enough talk, the dragon growled. Finish them, Sigrid, or our deal is void. Time seemed to slow as Sigrid raised her hands once more, dark energy swirling around her. I saw Elder Thora begin to chant, her staff glowing with a soft, golden light, and in that moment, I knew what I had to do. With a battle cry that tore from the depths of my soul, I charged forward. Sigrid's eyes widened in surprise as I closed the distance between us. Her spell, intended for Thora, went wide as I tackled her to the ground. We grappled in the dirt, magic and muscle straining against each other. I could feel the corrupted power coursing through her, burning where it touched my skin. But I held on, drawing on a strength I didn't know I possessed. Sigrid, I grunted, pinning her arms. It's not too late. Help us fight them. Help us save our people. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of the old Sigrid in her eyes, the wise counselor, the devoted protector of our people. But then the dragon roared, and that flicker was extinguished. You fool, she hissed. You've doomed us all. With a surge of strength she threw me off. I hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from my lungs. As I struggled to rise, I saw Sigrid turn towards the dragon, arms outstretched. Great one, she called. I offer myself as vessel for your power. Let our pact be sealed in blood and magic. Sigrid, no, I shouted, but it was too late. The dragon's eyes glowed with an infernal light, and a stream of dark energy poured from its maw into Sigrid's waiting form. She screamed, a sound of both agony and ecstasy that would haunt my dreams for years to come. When it was over, Sigrid stood transformed. Her eyes glowed with the same light as the dragon's, her skin taking on a scaled texture. When she spoke, her voice resonated with inhuman power. At last, she said, flexing her fingers as if testing a new body. Now you will all kneel, or you will burn. But before she could make good on her threat, a blinding light erupted from behind me. Elder Thora's voice, amplified 100-fold, rang out across the battlefield. By the ancient pacts, by the blood of our ancestors, I cast you out. The light coalesced into a shimmering barrier between us and Sigrid. She screamed in fury, hurling spell after spell at the magical wall, but to no avail. This isn't over, she snarled, her voice distorting further with each word. I will return, and when I do, all of Dragon's Crest will kneel before me. With a final, hate-filled glare, Sigrid took to the skies, the dragon following close behind. As they disappeared into the night, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. Håkon appeared at my side, helping me to my feet. Are you all right? He asked, concern etched on his face. I nodded wearily. But our troubles are far from over. Sigrid knows our plans, our weaknesses, and now she has the power of a dragon at her command. Elder Thora joined us, leaning heavily on her staff. Then we must move quickly, she said. The ancient stronghold is our only hope now. There, we might find the knowledge and power to combat this new threat. As we looked out over our battered but unbroken people, I felt the weight of leadership settle even more heavily on my shoulders. We had survived betrayal and dragonfire, but I knew in my heart that our greatest challenges still lay ahead. Rest while you can, I told Håkon and Thora. We move at first light. Every moment we delay gives Sigrid more time to plot our downfall. As I walked among our people, offering what comfort and encouragement I could, my mind raced with questions and fears. But beneath it all, a fire of determination burned bright. Sigrid's betrayal had shaken us, but it had not broken us. And when she returned, for I knew with certainty that she would, we would be ready. The saga of Dragon's Crest was far from over. In fact, I realized as I gazed at the star-filled sky, it was only just beginning. The acrid stench of smoke and charred flesh hung heavy in the air as I stumbled through the ruins of our camp. My mind raced, replaying the horrifying scene I had just witnessed, our supposed ally, negotiating with the very beast we had sworn to destroy. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on me like a physical force, each step forward a battle against the urge to collapse and give in to despair. As I approached the gathering of survivors, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear, I knew the revelation I carried would shatter what little hope remained. Hakon stood at the center, his once resplendent armor now dented and smeared with soot. His voice, still strong despite our losses, rallied the remaining warriors. "We may be bloodied, but we are not beaten. With the rising sun, we'll—" "Wait!" I called out, my voice cracking. All eyes turned to me, a mixture of curiosity and dread in their gazes. "There's something you all need to know." Hakon's brow furrowed. "What is it? Speak quickly. We haven't much time." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the storm I was about to unleash. "There's a traitor among us. I saw them meeting with the dragon." A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. Whispers and gasps broke out, the tension palpable. "Impossible!" Hakon thundered. "Who would dare betray us to that monster?" I hesitated, my eyes scanning the faces around me. I couldn't see clearly, but it was someone from our inner circle, someone who knew our plans. Immediately, the atmosphere shifted. Warriors who had stood shoulder to shoulder now eyed each other with suspicion. Friends became potential enemies in the blink of an eye. Astrid, our master archer, stepped forward. "How convenient that you alone witnessed this betrayal. How do we know you're not the traitor trying to sow discord?" "I'm not," I protested, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Bjorn, a bear of a man who had lost his entire family to the dragon, growled, "If there's a traitor, I say we root them out now, by force if necessary." The crowd murmured in agreement, hands moving to weapon hilts. The fragile unity we had maintained was crumbling before my eyes. "Stop this madness!" Elder Thora's voice cut through the growing chaos. The ancient woman hobbled forward, her eyes sharp despite her frail form. "This is exactly what the dragon wants, for us to turn on each other." Hakon nodded, though his eyes remained wary. "Thora speaks wisely. We cannot afford to fight amongst ourselves. Not now." "But the traitor," Astrid began, "will be dealt with," Hakon finished firmly. "But our priority must be the dragon. We strike at dawn, as planned." A tense silence fell over the group. The trust that had bound us together, forged in battle and loss, now lay in tatters. As the crowd dispersed to prepare for the coming fight, I felt the weight of 100 accusing stares. Hakon approached me, his voice low. "I pray to the gods you're mistaken about what you saw. If not..." He left the threat unspoken, but I understood. The price of my truth might be my own life. As night deepened, sleep eluded me. Every rustle, every whisper seemed to hide deadly intent. I found myself alone at the edge of the camp, staring out into the darkness when a voice startled me. "Trouble sleeping?" It was Eric, a young warrior barely out of boyhood. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Eric sat beside me, his youthful face serious in the moonlight. "Do you really think one of us could betray everything we fought for?" I sighed heavily. "I know what I saw, Eric. I wish to all the gods I hadn't, but I did." "But why?" he pressed. "What could the dragon offer that would be worth—" His words were cut short by an ear-splitting roar. The night sky lit up as if day had suddenly broken, a stream of fire painting the heavens orange and red. "It's attacking!" I shouted, leaping to my feet. "Sound the alarm!" Chaos erupted as warriors scrambled for weapons and positions. The dragon swooped low, its massive form blocking out the stars. Fire rained down, igniting tents and sending people screaming in all directions. In the midst of the pandemonium, I spotted a hooded figure darting away from the main group. Without thinking, I gave chase, my heart pounding with the certainty that this was our betrayer. I followed the figure to a small clearing, just out of sight of the main battle. As they turned, the hood fell back, revealing a face I knew all too well. "Lena?" I gasped, disbelieving. Lena, Hakon's own sister, regarded me with a mixture of defiance and sorrow. "I had hoped it wouldn't come to this," she said softly. "Why?" I demanded, my voice raw with emotion. "How could you do this to us? To your own brother?" "You don't understand," Lena pleaded. "The dragon. It showed me things. Knowledge beyond our wildest dreams. It promised to spare those who joined it. We don't have to die here." I shook my head, disgust and pity warring within me. "At what cost, Lena? Look around you. How many have already died because of your betrayal?" She flinched, but held her ground. "It's too late now. The dragon comes to claim what was promised." As if summoned by her words, a deafening roar shook the very ground beneath our feet. The dragon descended, its massive form casting us into shadow. "Lena, please," I begged, reaching out to her. "It's not too late. Help us fight. Help us end this." For a moment I saw doubt flicker in her eyes. But then the dragon landed and all hope of redemption vanished. "I'm sorry," Lena whispered, stepping back towards the beast. "I truly am." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The dragon's tail lashed out faster than thought. I dove to the side, but Lena wasn't so fortunate. The sickening crunch of bone filled the air, followed by a scream cut horribly short. I scrambled to my feet, bile rising in my throat as I saw Lena's broken body lying motionless on the ground. The dragon regarded me with what I could have sworn was amusement in its ancient eyes. "This is the loyalty of your kind," it rumbled, its voice like grinding stone. "Betrayal and death." Before I could respond, a battle cry rang out. Hakon charged into the clearing, his enchanted sword glowing with otherworldly light. "Monster!" he roared, his eyes wild with grief and rage as they fell upon his sister's corpse. "I'll send you back to whatever hell spawned you." The dragon's laughter shook the trees. "Brave words, little man, but you face powers beyond your comprehension." What followed was a battle that would be sung of for generations, if any survived to sing of it. Hakon fought with the fury of the gods themselves, his blade a blur of light against the dragon's dark scales. I joined the fray, my own weapons seeming pitiful in comparison but driven by a desperate need to end this nightmare. Other warriors arrived, drawn by the sounds of combat. But for every blow we landed, the dragon exacted a terrible price. Warriors I had known since childhood fell, their bodies broken and burned. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold that belied the carnage below, I found myself one of the few left standing. Hakon still fought, though his movements had slowed, his armor slick with blood, his own and others. The dragon, too, showed signs of wear. Ichor dripped from a dozen wounds, and one of its eyes had been put out by a well-aimed arrow. "Enough!" the beast roared, rearing up to its full height. "You have proven yourselves worthy adversaries. I offer you one last chance. Kneel before me and I will spare what remains of your people." Hakon spat blood, his grip tightening on his sword. "We'll die on our feet before we kneel to you, serpent." The dragon's remaining eye narrowed. So be it. With a speed that belied its massive size, the dragon lashed out. Hakon raised his sword in defense, but he was a fraction too slow. Razor-sharp claws tore through armor and flesh alike. "No!" I screamed, rushing forward even as Hakon fell. The dragon turned its baleful gaze upon me, and the handful of survivors who remained. "Your leader has fallen. Your traitor lies dead. What hope have you left?" I stood my ground, though every instinct screamed at me to flee. "As long as one of us draws breath, monster, we will fight. For our homes, for our fallen, for a future free from your shadow." The dragon regarded me for a long moment, smoke curling from its nostrils. Then, to my utter shock, it laughed, a sound like mountains crumbling. "Well spoken, little one. Perhaps your kind is not without merit after all. It spread its wings, casting us into darkness. We shall meet again when the wheel of fate turns once more. Until then, live with the knowledge of what your victory has cost you. With a gust of wind that nearly knocked us off our feet, the dragon took to the skies. We watched, scarcely daring to breathe, until its form disappeared beyond the mountains. As silence settled over the battlefield, I looked around at the devastation. The few survivors wore expressions of shock and disbelief. We had won, if it could be called that. But the price... Gods, the price had been so very high. I knelt beside Hakon's body, closing his sightless eyes. "Rest well, my friend," I murmured. "Your fight is over." As I stood, I felt the weight of responsibility settling onto my shoulders. There would be time for grief later. Now, we had wounded to tend to, dead to bury, and a village to rebuild. "What do we do now?" Eric asked, his young face aged beyond his years by what he had witnessed. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. "We go home, we tell our tale, and we prepare, for I fear this is not truly over." As we gathered our wounded and began the long trek back to the village, I couldn't shake the feeling that the dragon's words were more than just a threat. They were a promise, and one that would haunt us for generations to come. The cost of truth had been higher than I could have ever imagined. But as I looked at the determined faces of the survivors, I knew that we would endure. We had to, for those we had lost, and for those yet to come. The ancient map crinkled softly in my hands as I traced our path with a trembling finger. We had been walking for days, following the cryptic directions etched onto the weathered parchment. Our small band of survivors, once a proud army, now numbered barely 24. "Are you certain this is the way?" Astrid's voice was hoarse, her usual confidence wavering. "We've lost 3 more to those cursed traps since yesterday." I met her gaze, seeing my own weariness reflected in her eyes. "It has to be. All the texts point to this place, the true lair of the dragon." Hakon limped forward, his face gaunt, but his eyes burning with an intensity that unsettled me. "We're close. I can feel it in my bones." As if to punctuate his words, the ground beneath our feet trembled. A low rumble echoed through the cavern, causing loose stones to clatter down the walls. "Everyone, stay alert," I called out, my hand instinctively moving to the hilt of my sword. "We don't know what other defenses the beast has laid out for us." We pressed on, the air growing thicker and hotter with each step. The narrow passage we'd been following for hours suddenly opened up into a vast cavern. Gasps of awe and fear rippled through our group. Before us stretched an underground lake, its black surface as still as glass. Strange, luminescent fungi clung to the cavern walls, casting an eerie blue glow over everything. And there, on the far shore, loomed an entrance carved into the rock face, unmistakably dragon-made. "By the gods," Eric whispered, his young face pale in the ghostly light. "It's real. All of it." Hakon strode forward, his eyes fixed on the distant entrance. "Of course it's real, boy. Did you think we came all this way on a fool's errand?" I frowned at Hakon's tone but said nothing. The strain of leadership and loss had changed him, hardening him in ways that sometimes frightened me. "How do we cross?" Bjorn growled, eyeing the still water suspiciously. "I don't fancy a swim in that cursed pool." As if in answer, the ground shook again. This time the tremor was accompanied by a grinding sound. To our amazement, a stone bridge began to rise from the depths of the lake, forming a path to the far shore. "It's a trap," Astrid hissed. "It has to be." I nodded, scanning the cavern for any sign of movement. "Likely, but it's also our only way forward." I turned to address the group. "We go in pairs, weapons ready. Watch each other's backs and move quickly." One by one, our diminished band made their way across the bridge. The stone was slick beneath our feet, and more than once someone nearly lost their footing. But we pressed on, the weight of our mission driving us forward. As the last pair reached the midpoint of the bridge, A terrible screech filled the air. From the inky depths of the lake, massive tentacles erupted, thrashing wildly. "Run!" I shouted, drawing my sword. "Get to the shore!" Chaos erupted as we scrambled to safety. The tentacles lashed out, seeking prey. I watched in horror as one wrapped around Bjorn's leg, yanking him off his feet. "No!" Astrid cried, knocking an arrow to her bow. She let fly, her aim true even in the madness. The arrow struck the tentacle, causing it to recoil just enough for Bjorn to break free. We reached the far shore, breathless and shaken. As suddenly as it had appeared, the creature retreated, leaving the lake's surface as placid as before. "Is everyone all right?" I called out, doing a quick head count. To my relief, we had all made it across, though not unscathed. Cuts, bruises, and haunted expressions were evident on every face. Håkon stood before the carved entrance, his hand resting on the strange symbols etched into the stone. "This is it," he murmured. "The heart of the mountain. The dragon's true lair." I joined him, studying the markings. They seemed to shift and dance in the blue light, making my head spin if I looked too long. "Can you read them?" Håkon nodded slowly. "Parts. It's a warning. And an invitation." He traced one particular symbol, his expression unreadable. "It says, 'Only the worthy may enter. Only the worthy may claim the power within.'" A chill ran down my spine at his words. "Håkon, what aren't you telling us? What power?" For a moment I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes. A hunger, perhaps, or a secret long held. But then it was gone, replaced by his usual determined gaze. "The power to end this once and for all," he said firmly. "Come. We've come too far to turn back now." With a gesture that seemed almost reverent, Håkon pressed his palm against the center of the door. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a groan that seemed to come from the very bones of the earth, the stone began to move. We stepped back, weapons at the ready, as the massive door swung open. A wave of heat washed over us, carrying with it a scent that made my stomach churn. Sulfur, smoke, and something else. Something ancient and terrible. "Form up," I ordered, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. "Eric, Astrid, take the rear. Bjorn, you're with me and Håkon at the front. The rest of you stay close and watch for traps." We entered the dragon's lair, every sense on high alert. The passage twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the mountain. Strange carvings covered the walls, depicting scenes of battle, magic, and creatures I had no name for. After what felt like hours of tense silence, broken only by our footsteps and ragged breathing, we emerged into a chamber that defied belief. The cavern was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows high above. Columns of stone, thick as ancient trees, supported the immense weight of the mountain. And everywhere, covering every surface, was treasure beyond imagining. Gold coins formed drifts taller than a man. Gems the size of fists glittered in the strange, pulsing light that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Weapons of exquisite craftsmanship and armor that shimmered with magic lay scattered amongst artifacts of civilizations long forgotten. "By all that's holy," Eric breathed, his eyes wide. "We could buy kingdoms with this hoard." Hakon's voice cut through the awed whispers. "Focus. We're not here for treasure. The dragon is close, I can feel it." As if summoned by his words, a low rumble filled the chamber. The piles of treasure began to shift and slide as something massive stirred beneath. "Weapons ready," I shouted, raising my shield. "Form a circle, backs together." We had barely gotten into position when the dragon burst forth from its golden bed. It was larger than I remembered, its scales gleaming like polished obsidian in the ethereal light. But something was different. Its movements seemed sluggish, almost pained. The dragon's massive head swung towards us, its eyes focusing with an intelligence that sent shivers down my spine. "So," it rumbled, its voice like distant thunder. "The little ones have found their way to the heart of the mountain. I confess I did not think you would make it this far." Håkon stepped forward, his enchanted sword glowing with an otherworldly light. "We've come to end your reign of terror, beast. Your time is over." The dragon's laughter shook loose coins from the piles around us. "My time? Foolish mortal. My time is eternal. I was ancient when your ancestors first crawled from the sea." I raised my voice, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "Then perhaps it's time for something new. We may be mortal, but we will not bow to your tyranny any longer." The dragon's eyes narrowed, focusing on me with unsettling intensity. "Brave words, but do you understand what you face, what you seek to destroy?" It shifted, and I realized with a start that the dragon was wounded. Deep gashes marred its scales, still seeping ichor. "You're hurt," I said, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. "A temporary inconvenience," the dragon growled. "The price of underestimating your kind. A mistake I shall not repeat." Håkon tensed beside me, his knuckles white on the hilt of his sword. "Enough talk. We end this now." He charged forward, faster than I thought possible in his wounded state. The dragon reared back, its maw opening to unleash a torrent of flame. "Now!" I shouted to the others. "Attack while it's distracted." What followed was a battle that would be sung of for generations, if any of us survived to sing of it. We fought with everything we had, our blades and arrows seeking any weakness in the dragon's armor. But for all our preparation, for all our determination, we were like insects trying to bring down a mountain. The dragon's tail lashed out, sending warriors flying. Its claws raked through our ranks, leaving bloody furrows in their wake. And yet, incredibly, we held our ground. The dragon was weakening, its movements growing more labored with each passing moment. In a lull in the fighting, I found myself next to Håkon. Blood streamed from a gash above his eye, but his gaze was clear and focused. "We can do this," he panted. "We're wearing it down." I nodded, trying to catch my breath. "But at what cost? We've lost so many already." Håkon's expression hardened. "Any price is worth paying to rid the world of this evil." Before I could respond, the dragon's voice boomed out once more. "Enough. You have proven yourselves worthy adversaries. But do you truly understand what you seek to destroy?" To my shock, the dragon's form began to shimmer and change. It shrank, its scales melting away like snow in the sun. In moments, where the great beast had stood, there was now a figure that was somehow both ancient and ageless, neither fully human nor fully dragon. "What sorcery is this?" Astrid gasped, her bow half raised in confusion. The figure smiled, a sad and terrible expression. "No sorcery, child. Merely the truth you have been too blind to see." Håkon stepped forward, his sword still raised. "What are you?" "I am the guardian," the figure said, "the keeper of balance. For millennia I have watched over your kind, culling when necessary, guiding when possible." I felt as though the ground had dropped out from under me. You're saying all of this? The attacks, the destruction? It was some kind of test?" The guardian nodded solemnly. "A harsh one, yes, but necessary. Your kind has grown too quickly, too recklessly. Without challenge, without adversity, you would consume everything in your path." Anger flared in my chest. "You murdered innocent people, destroyed entire villages. And in doing so, I forged you into something stronger," the guardian countered. "Look at what you have accomplished. You stand here, in the heart of the mountain, having overcome trials that would have broken lesser beings." Håkon's voice was low, dangerous. "So what happens now? Do you expect us to simply accept this and walk away?" The guardian's gaze fell upon him, and I saw something like recognition pass between them. "That, Håkon, son of Harald, is up to you. You have proven yourselves worthy. The power you sought is within your grasp." A tense silence fell over the chamber. I looked at my companions, seeing the same mixture of confusion, anger, and terrible understanding on their faces. "What power?" I asked, dreading the answer. The guardian gestured, and a pedestal rose from the floor, bearing a crystal that pulsed with an inner fire. The power to shape the world, to guard it as I have done. But beware, such power comes at a great cost. Håkon stepped towards the pedestal, his eyes fixed on the crystal. Håkon, wait, I called out. We need to think about this. We came here to end a threat, not to take its place. He turned to me and I saw in his eyes a hunger that chilled me to my core. Don't you see? This is why we were chosen, why we survived when so many others fell. It's our destiny. As Håkon reached for the crystal, I realized with a sickening clarity that our true battle was only just beginning. The dragon may have been defeated, but the temptation of power threatened to corrupt the very thing we had fought so hard to protect. The heart of the mountain pulsed around us, and I knew that whatever happened next would shape the fate of our world for generations to come. The air in the cavernous chamber crackled with tension as Håkon's hand hovered mere inches from the pulsing crystal. Time seemed to slow, each heartbeat stretching into eternity as we stood on the precipice of a decision that would alter the course of history. Håkon, please, I pleaded, my voice hoarse with desperation. Think about what you're doing. We came here to end a threat, not to become one ourselves. He turned to face me, his eyes blazing with an intensity that I scarcely recognized. This was not the man I had followed into battle countless times, the leader who had inspired us through our darkest hours. Something had changed within him, a transformation as profound as it was terrifying. You don't understand, Håkon said, his voice resonating with newfound power. This is why we were chosen, why we survived when so many others fell. It's our destiny to wield this power, to shape the world as it should be. Astrid stepped forward, her bow lowered but her posture tense. Håkon, listen to reason. We've lost too much to throw away our humanity now. The Guardian, still in its hybrid form of human and dragon, watched the exchange with ancient eyes. Choose wisely, mortals. The power you seek comes with a price that few can bear. Håkon's laugh was bitter, edged with madness. Price? We've already paid in blood and sorrow. What more can it take from us? Before any of us could react, Håkon grasped the crystal. A blinding light erupted from the point of contact, forcing us to shield our eyes. When the glare subsided, what I saw turned my blood to ice. Håkon's form was changing, twisting in ways that defied natural law. His skin hardened into scales, his frame expanding and contorting. Wings burst from his back, tearing through armor and flesh alike. In mere moments, where my friend and leader had stood, there now towered a creature of nightmare, part man, part dragon, all-destroyer. By the gods, Eric whispered, his young face pale with terror. What have you done, Håkon? The thing that had been Håkon flexed its newfound form, eyes glowing with eldritch fire. When it spoke, its voice was a discordant blend of human and beast, shaking the very foundations of the mountain. I have become what I was always meant to be, it declared, the true guardian of this world, with the power to reshape it as I see fit. The Guardian's expression was grim, tinged with what might have been regret. You fool. You know not what you have unleashed. Håkon Dragon turned its baleful gaze upon the ancient being. I know exactly what I've done. Your time is over, old one. A new age begins now. With shocking speed, Håkon Dragon lashed out, claws raking through the Guardian's form, the hybrid being crumpled, its essence seeming to dissipate like mist in sunlight. No, I cried out, the full horror of our situation crashing down upon me. We had come to slay a dragon, only to create something far worse. Håkon Dragon's attention snapped to us, its former companions now looking very much like prey. Join me, it rumbled. Together we can remake the world, purge it of weakness and strife. Bjorn, ever the warrior, raised his axe with a defiant roar. I'd rather die on my feet than live as a monster. He charged forward, his weapon glinting in the ethereal light of the cavern. With a casual swipe of its tail, Håkon Dragon sent Bjorn flying across the chamber, He hit the far wall with a sickening crunch and didn't rise again. "Stop this madness, Hakon," I shouted, drawing my sword even as despair threatened to overwhelm me. "This isn't what we fought for. This isn't what our friends died for." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in those inhuman eyes, but it was quickly subsumed by the burning hunger for power. "You're right," Hakon Dragon snarled. "They died for nothing, but their sacrifices will not be in vain. I will use this power to ensure no one else need suffer as we have." Astrid knocked an arrow, her hand steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "And who decides what suffering is justified? You? We've seen where that path leads, Hakon. It ends in tyranny and death." The few of us left standing formed a ragged line, a pitiful last stand against the abomination our leader had become. We had faced death countless times on this journey, but never had it seemed so certain, so final. Hakon Dragon reared up, its massive form blocking out the cavern's strange light. "Then you leave me no choice. If you will not join me willingly, you will serve as an example of the price of defiance." What followed was a nightmare beyond imagination. We fought with every ounce of strength left in our battered bodies, every trick and tactic we had learned in our long war against the dragon. But it was like fighting against a force of nature, implacable, overwhelming, and utterly without mercy. One by one, my companions fell. Eric, barely more than a boy, was the first to go, his youth and inexperience no match for Hakon Dragon's brutal strength. Astrid lasted longer, her arrows finding chinks in the beast's armor, but even her legendary aim couldn't save her from its fiery breath. Through it all, I fought on, driven by a mixture of desperation and duty. This was my fault, in a way. I had seen the changes in Hakon, the growing obsession, the hunger for power. I should have done something sooner, should have seen where this path would lead us. As the battle raged, the cavern itself seemed to come alive. The strange pulsing light grew more intense and the very air thrummed with energy. Treasures that had lain dormant for millennia began to stir, ancient magics awakening in response to the clash of powers. In a brief lull in the fighting, I found myself face to face with Hakon Dragon. Blood streamed from a dozen wounds, my armor hanging in tatters, but I raised my sword once more. "It doesn't have to be this way, Hakon," I gasped, each breath a struggle. "You can still turn back. We can find another way." For a moment, something like doubt flickered in the creature's eyes. "There is no other way," it rumbled, but the words lacked conviction. "This is the only path to true peace." I shook my head, a sad smile tugging at my lips despite everything. "Peace built on the bones of your friends? On the ashes of everything we fought to protect? That's not peace, Hakon. It's just another form of tyranny." Hakon Dragon roared, the sound shaking loose stones from the cavern ceiling. "Enough. I will hear no more of your weakness." It lunged forward, jaws snapping shut where I had been standing a heartbeat before. I rolled to the side, my battered body protesting every movement. As I came up, my hand closed around something smooth and cold. One of the magical artifacts scattered across the chamber floor. A jolt of energy surged through me, and suddenly I knew what I had to do. It was a desperate plan, likely to fail, but it was all I had left. "Hakon!" I called out, brandishing the artifact. It was a scepter of some kind, its surface etched with runes that glowed with an inner fire. "You wanted power? Let me show you true power." I had no idea what the scepter did, but I poured every ounce of will I had left into it. To my amazement, it responded, a beam of pure energy lancing out to strike Hakon Dragon square in the chest. The beast howled, more in surprise than pain, but it was enough. The momentary distraction gave me the opening I needed. I charged forward, my sword raised high. "This ends now," I cried, bringing the blade down with all my remaining strength. Time seemed to slow as the enchanted steel met scale and flesh. For a terrible moment, I thought it would not be enough. But then, with a sound like the world itself breaking, my sword plunged deep into Hakon Dragon's heart. The creature's roar of pain and fury shook the very foundations of the mountain. It thrashed wildly, its tail smashing pillars and sending treasures flying. I clung to the hilt of my sword, refusing to let go even as the beast's death throes threatened to tear me apart. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Haken Dragon collapsed, its massive form shuddering one final time before going still. The unnatural fusion of man and beast began to unravel, scales falling away to reveal human flesh once more. I stumbled back, my legs finally giving out. As I sat there, surrounded by the bodies of my fallen comrades and the wreckage of our final battle, I watched as Haken's form returned fully to human. His eyes fluttered open, clear and free of the madness that had consumed him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice weak but unmistakably his own. I thought I could make things right." I crawled to his side, taking his hand in mine. "I know, old friend. I know." Haken's grip tightened, surprising strength in his dying body. "Promise me," he gasped. "Promise me you'll do better, that you'll find a way to protect our people without becoming the very thing we fought against." Tears blurred my vision as I nodded. "I promise, Haken. I promise." With a final, shuddering breath, Haken, hero, leader, friend, closed his eyes for the last time. I don't know how long I sat there, surrounded by the echoes of our final battle. The strange, pulsing light of the cavern had dimmed, as if the heart of the mountain itself mourned our loss. Eventually, I forced myself to my feet. There was work to be done, bodies to be tended to, a story to be told, a promise to be kept. As I made my way towards the cavern's exit, a soft voice stopped me in my tracks. "You have done well, mortal." I turned to see the Guardian, its form wavering like smoke but undeniably present. "I thought you were destroyed," I said, too weary for surprise. The ancient being's smile was sad and knowing. "It takes more than that to end one such as I. The test is complete, though the cost was high." "Test?" I spat, anger flaring through my exhaustion. "Is that what you call this slaughter?" The Guardian's expression remained impassive. "The greatest threats often come from within. You have proven yourselves worthy guardians of your own destiny." Before I could respond, the being began to fade. "Remember this day," it said, its voice growing fainter. "Remember the price of power and the strength found in compassion. The future of your world rests in your hands now." And then I was alone, truly alone, in the heart of the mountain. The weight of responsibility settled onto my shoulders, heavier than any armor I had ever worn. As I made my way out of the cavern, back towards a world that would never be the same, I carried with me the memories of those we had lost, the lessons we had learned at such terrible cost, and a promise that would shape the rest of my days. The true enemy, I realized, had never been the dragon. It had been the darkness within our own hearts, the temptation of power that could corrupt even the noblest soul. And that was a battle that would never truly end. But for now, there were survivors to lead, a tale to tell, and a future to build. One step at a time, I began the long journey home, leaving behind the heart of the mountain and the shattered remnants of our greatest trial. The story of Haken and the dragon would be told for generations, a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope. And I would ensure that the true lessons of our journey would never be forgotten, no matter the cost. The journey back from the heart of the mountain was a blur of exhaustion, pain, and grief. Each step was a battle against my own battered body and the weight of all we had lost. The few survivors who remained with me moved like ghosts, their eyes haunted by the horrors we had witnessed. As we emerged from the mountain's shadow, the world seemed different somehow. The colors were muted, the air heavy with an unseen burden. Or perhaps it was just us who had changed, irreversibly marked by our ordeal. The village came into view as we crested the final hill. Smoke rose from chimneys, and I could hear the distant lowing of cattle. It was so achingly normal, so untouched by the cataclysmic events we had just lived through, that for a moment, I wondered if it had all been some terrible dream, but the aches in my body and the absence of so many familiar faces beside me were all too real reminders of the truth. As we approached the village gates, a cry went up from the watchtower. "They're back! Open the gates!" The heavy wooden doors swung open, and a flood of villagers poured out to meet us. Their faces were a mixture of joy, relief, and growing concern as they realized how few of us had returned. Inga, the village elder, pushed her way through the crowd. Her wizened face creased with worry as she took in our battered state. "What happened? Where are the others? Where is Håkon?" The questions hit me like physical blows. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. How could I possibly explain what we had been through? How could I tell them that their beloved leader had become the very thing we had set out to destroy? Astrid, ever loyal, stepped forward. Her left arm was in a makeshift sling, and a nasty gash across her cheek was still oozing blood, but her voice was steady. "We need to call a gathering. Everyone needs to hear this, and we only want to tell it once." Inga nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Of course. I'll have the horn sounded. Go to the Great Hall and rest. You look like you're about to collapse." As we made our way through the village, I could feel the weight of 100 stares. Whispers followed in our wake, speculation and fear building with each step. By the time we reached the Great Hall, it felt like the very air was thick with tension. Inside, we collapsed onto benches, our bodies finally giving in to exhaustion. Healers bustled around us, tending to our wounds with gentle efficiency. I wanted nothing more than to close my eyes and let oblivion take me, but I knew my duty wasn't done yet. The sound of the great horn echoed through the village, calling everyone to assembly. Slowly, the hall filled with people. Faces both familiar and strange turned towards us, hungry for news and dreading what they might hear. When it seemed the entire village had gathered, Inga called for silence. "Our warriors have returned," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "They have faced great peril on our behalf, and now they will share their tale." All eyes turned to me, and I felt the crushing weight of responsibility settle onto my shoulders. Slowly, painfully, I stood. "Friends," I began, my voice hoarse, "we set out to face a great evil, to rid our lands of the dragon's terror once and for all, and in that, we succeeded." A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd, but I raised a hand to quiet them. But the cost was higher than any of us could have imagined. Over the next hour, I recounted our journey. The treacherous mountain passages, the loss of so many brave companions, the final confrontation in the heart of the mountain. I told them of the Guardian's test, of the terrible choice that faced us, and then, with a heavy heart, I told them of Håkon's fall. The power he sought to protect us became his undoing, I said, my voice breaking. In the end, he became the very thing we had sworn to destroy. Gasps of shock and cries of disbelief filled the hall. I saw tears on many faces, anger on others. Inga's expression was one of deep sorrow, but not surprise. Perhaps she had seen something in Håkon that the rest of us had missed. But even in his darkest moment, a part of Håkon remained, I continued. With his last breath, he made me promise to find a better way, to protect our people without becoming tyrants ourselves. A heavy silence fell over the hall. The implications of what I had said were slowly sinking in. Our great hero had fallen, and now we were left to face an uncertain future without him. Bjorn, his arm in a sling and his face a mass of bruises, spoke up. "So what happens now? Who will lead us?" All eyes turned to me once again, and I felt a moment of panic. I don't know," I admitted. "But I do know this. We can't go back to the way things were. We've seen the cost of unchecked power, of letting fear drive our actions. We need to find a new way forward." Inga nodded slowly. Wise words, but easier said than done, I fear. Our people have lived under the shadow of the dragon for generations. Freedom is a heavy burden to bear. Then we'll bear it together, Astrid said, rising to stand beside me. We've always been stronger as a community. Why should that change now? A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. I could see hope beginning to spark in some eyes, though doubt and fear still lingered in others. It won't be easy, I cautioned. We'll face new challenges, threats we can't even imagine yet. But if we stand together, if we remember the lessons we've learned at such terrible cost, I believe we can build something better. As the discussion continued late into the night, plans began to take shape. We would form a council, with representatives from all parts of our community. Decisions would be made openly, with the input of all. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was a start. As the meeting finally broke up in the early hours of the morning, Inga approached me. "You've taken on a heavy burden," she said softly. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I smiled wearily. "No, but I made a promise and I intend to keep it." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. There were funerals to arrange, homes to rebuild, and a new system of governance to establish. Through it all, the weight of our losses hung heavy over the village. One crisp autumn morning, I found myself standing before the village, ready to address them as their newly elected council leader. The great hall was packed. Faces both familiar and new turned towards me expectantly. "Friends, neighbors, fellow survivors," I began, my voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "We stand here today at the dawn of a new era. The shadow that has hung over our lands for generations has been lifted, but at a terrible cost." I paused, letting my gaze sweep over the assembled crowd. I saw grief in many eyes, but also determination and hope. "We have lost much," I continued. "Loved ones, homes, the certainty of knowing our place in the world. But we have gained something too. We have gained the freedom to shape our own destiny." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "It won't be easy. We'll face challenges we can't even imagine yet. But I believe that together we can build something better than what came before. A community where every voice is heard, where power is a responsibility, not a right." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my next words. "I stand before you not as a hero or a chosen one, but as someone who has seen the cost of unchecked power. I promise you this. I will do everything in my power to honor the sacrifices that brought us here, to build a future worthy of those we've lost." As I spoke, I caught a glimpse of movement at the back of the hall. For just a moment, I thought I saw a familiar figure, Hakon, as he had been before the dragon's power corrupted him. He nodded once, a sad smile on his face, before fading away. I blinked, unsure if it had been real or just a trick of the light, but the memory of his final words echoed in my mind, strengthening my resolve. "We have a long road ahead of us," I concluded. "But I believe in us, in our strength, our compassion, our ability to learn and grow. Together, we will write the next chapter of our story." As applause filled the hall, I felt a mixture of hope and trepidation. The future was uncertain, full of potential both bright and dark. But as I looked out at the faces of my community, I knew we would face it together. Later that day, as the sun began to set, I found myself walking to the edge of the village. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks shrouded in mist. Somewhere in those ancient stones lay the remains of our greatest trial and our deepest loss. As I stood there lost in thought, a young voice broke into my reverie. "Is it true?" a small boy asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "Did you really fight a dragon?" I turned to him, seeing the same mix of fear and fascination I had once felt about the old tales. For a moment I was tempted to spin a heroic yarn, to paint our ordeal in glorious colors. But then I remembered the true cost of those glories, the danger of myths that glossed over hard truths. I knelt down to the boy's level. "It's true that we faced a great danger," I said carefully, "but the real battle wasn't against a monster. It was against the darkness that can live inside all of us. The dragon was just a symbol of that." The boy's brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't understand," I smiled gently. That's okay. It's a complicated story. But here's what's important. We learned that true strength doesn't come from having the most power. It comes from how we treat each other, how we face our fears together. As I spoke, I saw understanding begin to dawn in the child's eyes. It wasn't the whole truth. That would come later, when he was old enough to bear it. But it was a start. "Do you think there are more dragons out there?" the boy asked, a hint of excitement in his voice. I looked back towards the mountains, thinking of the guardian's words about tests and worthiness. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I do know this. Whatever comes, we'll face it together, and that makes us stronger than any dragon." As the boy ran off to share this new perspective with his friends, I remained at the village's edge, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The future was uncertain, full of challenges we couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time since our return, I felt a genuine spark of hope. We had faced our greatest fear and emerged changed, but unbroken. Whatever came next, we would face it with the wisdom hard-won from our ordeal. The tale of Haken and the dragon would be told for generations, a reminder of both the perils of unchecked power and the strength found in unity. As darkness fell, I turned back towards the village, towards the warm lights of homes and the sounds of life continuing. We had a new chapter to write, a future to build. And though the weight of responsibility was heavy, I no longer carried it alone. The dragon was gone, but our true journey was just beginning.